the year 1890, the iron constitution of Mr. Sherlock Holmes began to give way. His health weakened under constant hard work and was aggravated by indiscretions of his own. When Holmes was deep into a case and lost in thought, he smoked large quantities of tobacco. But when he had no case to pursue and lacked for stimulation, he would dose himself with cocaine. As a medical man, I warned him many times of the dangers, but only after his health had noticeably deteriorated did he agree to take my advice and give himself a complete change of scene and air by a sojourn in the tropics. And the tropical country he proposed to visit was the Kingdom of Hawaii. 3 years previous, in 1887, Holmes had done a small service for the island's royal family when the king's sister, Liliuokalani, came to England to attend Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. Holmes insists that the story of that adventure remain untold for the present. Perhaps someday. Well, in any event, Holmes had a standing invitation to visit the islands. We arrived in the Kingdom of Hawaii in November of 1890. Liliuokalani was delighted to renew her acquaintance with Holmes. She presented us to her brother, King Kalakaua, who held a great feast in Holmes' honor. But Holmes grew irritable. Any sort of flattery or adulation was abhorrent to him. He was to sojourn in the farthest, most remote part of the kingdom. So, at the king's suggestion, we boarded an inter-island vessel of Wilder's Steamship Company and were put ashore in a light tender on the southern coast of the island of Hawaii. We were conveyed uphill on a horse-drawn carriage to the steamship line's famous Volcano house, at the very edge of the living crater of Halemaumau. Here we rested and explored the exotic landscape, and Holmes, for the first time since I've known him, surrendered himself to relaxation and pursuits of a non-criminal nature. We had been there just under a fortnight when our peaceful, healthy routine was violently interrupted, and we found ourselves plunged into a problem at our very doorstep which was more intense, more engrossing, and infinitely more mysterious and horrifying than any of those which Holmes had ever confronted in London.
What do you make of this, Watson?
What's that?
It says here the ancient Hawaiian islanders had a medicine man or a priest whom they called Kahuna Ana Ana, who was capable of uttering prayers that would drive a man mad. And if he was sufficiently motivated to do so, he could literally pray a man to death. Remarkable, don't you think? I wonder what sort of traces death by prayer would leave on a corpse.
Death by prayer? That's the most outlandish thing I've ever heard, Holmes. As a medical doctor, I'd say it's impossible, and you, as a man of science, should know better too. What sort of sensational literature have you got there?
The book was on the shelf here at our hotel, the Volcano House, and was recommended to me by our innkeeper's wife, Mrs. Mabby. Tales of the Ancient Hawaiians. The author holds that things which we consider to be scientifically impossible may be true, or that they may have been true in ancient times, and that we consider them to be impossible only because the knowledge of how they were accomplished has been lost, or that modern science has not yet uncovered it.
I'm astonished, Holmes. You of all people, taking the side of superstition and magic.
Not at all. It is in my nature to acquaint myself with any and all manner of death and dying which may someday, or in some way, have a bearing on a case which I might be engaged. And as for sensational literature, well, it was you who wrote of me in the first of your articles for the Strand magazine, and I quote, that I appear to know every detail of every horror perpetrated in the century.
Yes, I recall that.
And how do you think I go about gaining such knowledge? Besides, need I remind you that your reputation depends on what I have always considered to be the sale of sensational literature. Those fictions you concoct about my scientific methods of observation and deduction.
Observation and deduction, are they not the same thing?
Hardly. Well, for example, I observe that this afternoon you have been to the post office in the volcano town, and I deduce that while there you dispatched a telegram.
Right. Right on both points. But I confess, I don't see how you knew that. I mentioned it to no one. It was a sudden impulse on my part. In fact, you were not even in the room when I left or when I returned.
It is simplicity itself, so utterly simple that any explanation would be superfluous.
Nonetheless, I would be obliged if you would...
All right, and it does serve to distinguish between observation and deduction. You have a little brown mud adhering to the instep of one of your boots. Just opposite the post office in the town here, they have taken up the wooden walk and thrown up some earth in such a way that it is impossible to keep from treading on it when entering or leaving the building. The earth is of a particular tint which I have so far seen nowhere else in this neighborhood. So much for observation, the rest is deduction, hence the telegram.
Well, it's true. I sent my literary agent a telegram authorizing him to approve publication of an anthology of your most celebrated cases.
Watson, your romantic versions of my matters of observation and deduction cause me great embarrassment. All those people in Honolulu waving their copies of the Strand magazine about, begging for my autograph.
Yes, I'm sorry for that. But back to the telegram. How could you have known?
I deduced it. You did not need to go to the post office to mail a letter since we have a post box here at the hotel. Neither did you need to supply, since I know in your bag you have ample writing paper, a sheet of stamps, and a bundle of postal cards. For what other reason could you need to go to the post office then but to dispatch a wire?
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson.
I observe that is the voice of our innkeeper's wife. I deduce that she is summoning us to supper.
Capital, Watson. Capital.
It's Mrs. Mabby, sir. May I come in?
Of course, Mrs. Mabby, do come in.
I wanted to invite you both to the dining room to meet a most extraordinary man. The celebrated Dr. Leon Sterndale has been collecting plants in the Volcano area, and he is just now dining at the hotel. Would you care to meet him?
Mrs. Mabby, this little hotel of yours is located at a veritable crossroads of the world. Dr. Sterndale is the foremost naturalist of our time. By all means, let us go and meet him.
The Fijian Islands, whereas the Hawaiians have their young boys and girls chew it up, mix it with their saliva, and spit it into a bowl, you see? Now, the Fijians, they call it yagogo. The Samoans call it kava kava, and the Hawaiians call it ava. The names are linguistically related. Of course, they do vary from island group to island group, but I have discovered and have proven that despite its various names, it's exactly the same plant wherever it's found across the Pacific. And of course, it was I who gave it its Latin name, as it is a member of the pepper family and produces intoxication. I have named it Piper methysticum.
And have you intoxicated yourself with this plant as well?
Well, of course I have. I mean, what manner of scientist would I be if I did not test my own hypotheses, huh? You see, Mr. Holmes, your methods and mine are not altogether dissimilar. I, too, take a chain of seemingly unrelated things and, by a set of inferences, link them all together. Now, it's a method that served me well, and no doubt has served you well in your line of work, too.
There is a resemblance, yes. And I have used your excellent books of reference in my own research into toxic plants and compounds. Mrs. Mabby tells us that you are on your way to Hilo. Do you board a ship in that port?
Yes, I do, this very evening, as a matter of fact. Yes, I've already sent my specimen crates of my luggage on ahead. Yes, the ship is bound for Australia, and I'm going on to Borneo to resume my research into the Hawaiian car tree. Now, it's a giant of a tree, but botanically it's a humble legume. It's a member of the pea family, and so far has been found nowhere else but Hawaii.
You have studied it here, then?
Obviously.
I gather you come here often.
Oh, every chance I get. Something draws me back and makes this world-weary traveler feel quite at home, even amongst this grotesque landscape of giant ferns and lava freshly erupted from the bowels of the earth.
For a scientist, Dr. Sterndale, you wax poetic.
Oh.
Is there some special attraction which draws you here?
It is the allure of the volcano goddess, Pele. She casts her spell over all who slumber near her home in the fire pit.
And where do you slumber, Dr. Sterndale? This is the first we have heard that you are anywhere near the home of this primeval goddess. We have not had the pleasure of your company until now.
Well, I do not choose to be in company. No, I sleep alongside my work in a pitched tent. It's a habit to which I've grown accustomed in my more remoter travels, and now I confess I find it hard to enjoy the beds of even a small but gracious hotel. Mr. Holmes, I hear that you are something of an expert on the subject of footprints.
I have published a monograph on the tracing of footsteps with some remarks as to the use of plaster of Paris for the preserving of impressions.
And what would you say to petrified volcanic ash as a preserver of footprints, huh? I think you should visit the cow footprints, don't you think so?
Oh, absolutely. If my husband were not away in Honolulu, he would lead you there. But it's easy enough to find by yourself.
What are the Kau footprints, huh?
No, about 100 years ago, this very month, in actual fact, November of 1790, a party of Hawaiian warriors was stranded, about 7 miles from here, by a sudden eruption of the volcano. They were almost instantaneously suffocated with a thick cloud of ash and dust that descended and covered the low ground around them. Now, by the time their comrades found them, rain had turned the ash and the dust to mud. Now they walked up to them thinking that they were asleep, but upon realizing they'd been struck dead by the goddess Pele herself, they broke ranks, they went mad, they ran in all directions, leaving their footprints in the mud, which of course they had congealed, and now that's all we have left, are their footprints. Now I've been cataloguing some rather interesting plants in the area.
I feel obliged to point out that Dr. Sterndale's rational scientific explanation for the deaths of the soldiers is not the only explanation. In fact, in that book which you were reading,
Oh, yes, fascinating.
yes, the story is particularly well told. Those warriors were in service to a chief called Keoua, who was the principal rival of the higher chief Kamehameha. And they were marching to do battle against Kamehameha's army for control of the island. Kamehameha prevailed and became king. However, there are those who say that the defeat of Keoua's army was not merely a military defeat. It is said that Kamehameha had a special kind of priest called a Kahuna Ana Ana, whose job it was to pray for those soldiers to die. And the men who came after were driven mad by the continuing influence of those same deathly prayers.
What poppycock!
Let us not be too hasty in our judgment, Watson. There may be, as the Bard of Avon says, more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Perhaps we have been here too long, Holmes. You seem to be falling under the spell of this volcano goddess yourself, huh?
But is the subject not intriguing and distracting? Or would you perhaps I rather turn for stimulation to the, cocaine? I thought not. I thank you for the news of the footprints, Dr. Sterndale. Watson and I will certainly examine this place before we leave this quiet retreat.
Now, what a shame that we won't be sharing a voyage, Mr. Holmes. I'm sure we'd have an awful lot to discuss en route. But, alas, my ship sails too soon.
Yes, indeed, the time is short. If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I'll have the boys see to your horse.
Yeah, it was an honor to meet you, Mr. Holmes.
Thank you for a fine and stimulating evening, Dr. Sterndale.
Pleasant voice to you, sir.
There's a strange fellow, Watson. He has been here longer than we have, yet we have not yet met face to face.
Yeah, well, he keeps to his room, I suppose.
No, I've seen that he has been working out of doors.
Well, likes to be alone, then.
On the contrary, he keeps frequent company elsewhere. His clothes and shoes are in good repair, and I can see from his hands that he does not do this work himself. Instead, the knees of his trousers are smudged, and there are traces of earth on his palms and under his fingernails. I deduce that he has been digging in the ground.
Well, perhaps he is the groundskeeper for the Volcano house. Huh?
Well, Dr. Sterndale's off, and I miss his company already.
No, my dear Mrs. Mabby, who is that gentleman that just now entered the hotel? You must have seen him pass through. Is he your gardener?
Oh, poor Mr. Ludlow, no. Although he does cultivate a fine garden. Oh, in fact, how could I forget? He's the author of that book that we were talking about, Tales of the Ancient Hawaiians. But as I say, his real forte is cultivating vegetables. And he has a marvelous garden, which he provides in exchange for his lodging here. In fact, the strawberries and the cabbage that we had this evening came from his garden.
It must be close by then.
Oh, the family has a house about a mile down the road where his sister and 2 brothers live. They're lovely people, but there was a quarrel last year over some income property, and Mr. Ludlow came to live here for a while. Although he's been going back to tend the garden, and he gets his laundry and whatnot taken care of there, so I suppose it's all patched up now. They're splendid people. And marvelous card players. Ah, do you play whist, Mr. Holmes?
Alas, I do not, but the good doctor is a card player.
Perhaps your lodger would join us.
Oh, Mr. Ludlow, Mortimer?
Yes.
Perhaps you've not met our famous guest. This is the celebrated detective, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and Dr. John Watson, his friend and biographer, Mr. Mortimer Ludlow. Mortimer, would you care to play whist with Dr. Watson and myself?
No, I'm sorry. I'm due at my family's house to play cards this evening.
Oh, well, another time then.
Yes. Good night.
Good night.
Hey, quiet fella.
Well, not everyone can be loquacious. You don't know how much I've enjoyed having you gentlemen here to talk to.
Oh, of course. And now, if you'll excuse me, I will get back to that book you so kindly lent me, Mrs. Mabby, on, shall we say, the power of prayer to produce otherwise unexplainable madness and death. I'm really looking forward to seeing those footprints that Dr. Sterndale mentioned. We'll go there tomorrow, eh, Watson?
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Well then, good night.
Good night, Mr. Holmes.
Yes, good night, Holmes.
Cribbage, Dr. Watson?
Oh, with pleasure, with pleasure.
It's still chilly from last night's rain.
Hardly my idea of a tropical paradise, Holmes. It's deuced cold. Huh?
Did you know the coffee we drank for breakfast this morning was grown nearby in Ola'a on this very island?
I would have preferred that the plantations had cultivated tea.
Mr. Holmes! Mr. Holmes! Oh, the most extraordinary tragic affair occurred during the night at Mortimer's house.
It's horrible. Horrible.
And you're the one man we need.
Shall I explain?
But since you seem to have been the one to have made the discovery, whatever it might be, and Mrs. Mabby to have had the news secondhand, perhaps you had better do the talking.
Is this far to this place?
About a mile. Let's walk quickly.
I should explain, Mr. Holmes, that when I left the hotel last evening, I walked to my family's house to have supper and play cards with my brothers, Owen and George, and my sister Brenda. After our meal, we adjourned to the parlor and sat down for a game of whist.
That was an excellent supper, thank you.
It was your sweet potatoes that made it so good.
Not to mention the chicken from Owen's coop.
Yes, but it all comes down to Mrs. Porter's fine cooking now, doesn't it?
Indeed, we are lucky to have a housekeeper who is also a good cook.
Whose turn is it to deal the card?
Mine, I believe. You let off last time.
There's to be a new sugar venture. Have you heard? Just outside of Hilo.
I hope you're not getting involved with it, Mortimer.
No, I've learned my lesson.
I hope so. If you should experiment with sugar canes the way you did with coffee trees, I pity
That's
the whole...
enough, George. We'll have no more carping on that unhappy episode. We agreed to let bygones be bygones, didn't we?
Brenda's right. Mortimer, you're in good standing again with us.
With all of us.
That's a fact.
I'm very glad to hear you say so. It's very reassuring to me to be welcomed back into the family so we can make a fresh start. What is it, George?
I thought I saw something in the window.
You're right, there is something moving out there. Do you want me to go see?
Oh, it's probably just one of the neighbor's dogs.
It seemed bigger than that.
There it is again! It looked like a face in the window.
Really? Man or animal?
Where?
In the garden.
I don't see anything.
Well, it was there, I tell you.
A ghost, I suppose.
Brenda!
If George said he saw something.
I did see something.
Oh, right, you saw something, but I think it was Mrs. Porter visiting the necessary.
Our refined sister can't bring herself to say out.
It must have been Mrs. Porter.
Of course.
When she wakes up, I'll ask her what time she moved her bowels.
You'll do no such thing.
You know, it might have been an animal. A pig, maybe. It was large enough, but it didn't look like a pig.
Some of the ancient Hawaiian gods could change their shape and turn into pigs. It could have been something unearthly.
Fraidy cat! Fraidy cat!
That's enough, boys. Let's play cards.
I'm feeling lucky tonight.
Nothing came of the incident at the window. When I left a little after 10 o'clock, George, Owen, and Brenda were in excellent spirits. I returned to my room at the Volcano house and slept. I am an early riser and I take a constitutional walk before breakfasting. Suddenly, this morning, I was overtaken by Mr. Aaron Kamaka, who said our housekeeper, Mrs. Porter, had sent a boy to fetch him to the house. I sprang up and we ran there together. When we reached the house, Mr. Holmes, they were as you see them now.
I'm sorry, Mortimer. I have telegraphed to Hilo for an ambulance to take your brothers to the hospital and for Hearst, too.
I understand, sir.
Let me introduce Mr. Aaron Kamaka, the King's business agent for the island of Hawaii, Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson.
Ah, Mr. Holmes, I've heard of you, of course. His Majesty telegraphed me that you were visiting. I'm so sorry we have to meet under these terrible circumstances. I'm sure as Mortimer must have told you.
I can't believe it. They were in such good spirits when I left, and now look at them. My brother's gone mad, my sister dead. He's not of this world. Something wicked has come into this room and dashed the light of reason from their minds. It's too much like... I hesitate to suggest it, but I must. Some kahuna Ana has prayed for this.
Do not be so hasty in assuming such a thing.
Give me your opinion, Watson.
Well, if I ever saw a woman dead of fright, it is poor Brenda Ludlow here. Her brothers, too, seem to have been literally driven mad with fear. I suppose the brothers murdered the sister and then were driven insane by the realization of what they had done.
They were such friendly people, all of them. Oh, could something... What about what they saw through the window? Perhaps something devilish slipped inside and did this gruesome work.
Kahuna Ana.
Mortimer, stop that. What exactly did you see out in the garden?
No, I just don't know. It was something, though, large and sinister. Not of this world. It materialized here, frightened my brothers and slew my sister.
A supernatural manifestation.
Something inhuman.
If the matter is beyond humanity, then it is certainly beyond me. But we must exhaust all natural explanations before falling back on the supernatural. Mr. Kamaka, tell me everything you experienced when you entered the room.
Well, it's not so much what I saw as what I felt. And truth to tell, I felt was a sense of horror. That's what it was. A terrifying sensation, eerie, unexplainable. Frankly, Mr. Holmes, difficulty maintaining my composure and had to sit for some minutes to collect myself.
You haven't time, have you?
Only what was necessary to determine that Miss Ludlow was in fact deceased. And I shifted the empty chair a little ways to keep clear of her brother's rage. But now you must excuse me. The ambulance and Hearst are here. Gentlemen, Mrs. Mabby, will you please give me a hand?
I'm so frightened. What happened? Can you explain it?
No, I cannot. But here's perhaps a gentleman who can. This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes. He's a detective. Our housekeeper and cook, Mrs. Porter.
I still can't believe it. It's all so sudden and terrifying.
Try to remember exactly everything from the beginning, what you saw and heard. What time did you come downstairs this morning?
Well, the family's usually asleep by 11. I'm an especially sound sleeper, and I didn't wake up any time of the night. But the neighbor's rooster crowed about 6 o'clock, as he usually does, and then I rose from bed and dressed and went downstairs to boil the water for coffee. Master Owen soon does like his coffee in the morning, and Mr. George, and Miss Brenda.
Now.
Oh, it's so awful to think. It's awful.
Mrs. Porter, listen, we know how difficult this must be for you, but please come on. Please.
Yes. Try to remember everything that happened when you entered the room. What was the first thing you saw or heard?
Actually, I cannot recall. Because the very first thing that happened was I bade him get away, right down here, in front of the fireplace. I was more surprised than anything else because I remember thinking as I fell how unusual it was for the family would already be awake and around the table before I'd even made the coffee or started cooking breakfast. So it wasn't until I woke up on the floor and then stood up that I saw the dreadful scene around the table. And I felt a terrible headache. I must have hit my head as I fell.
What happened next?
I needed fresh air to clear my head, so I threw the windows open. The morning was cold and foggy, but I took deep breaths, and when I was sufficiently recovered, I started screaming for help. But apparently no one heard me, so then I ran down the lane to the neighbor's house. That's a house where the rooster crows, and then I rapped on the door until their boy came out, and then I sent him the rest of the way down into Volcano Village to fetch Mr. Kamaka.
How much time elapsed before he arrived?
10 minutes, maybe a little more. Master Mortimer was with him. They were both overcome by the horror. Mr. Kamaka had to sit down and catch his breath. I thought for a moment that he might fall into a faint as I did.
And Mortimer Ludlow, what did he do?
Nothing. Yes, he was terrified. He threw his hand over his face like this and ran from the room. And when he was outside, he called back to me saying he was going to run over to the Volcano house and tell Mrs. Mabby and try to bring back someone else. I suppose now that it was you, Mr. Holmes.
Can you think if anything's been stolen?
Oh, I don't believe so. I've had time to look around. Nothing's missing. Nothing's amiss. Nothing's even been rearranged. There's nothing missing. My mistress is dead. And her two brothers are. Oh, for God's sake, find the thing that killed a sweet young woman and don't two strong men out of their senses. Why fire in such a small room?
Nights are cold and damp near the volcano.
They certainly are.
When was it lit?
I don't know, but it had been lit before I arrived.
You said that you left a little after 10. Was it still burning when you left, or had it gone out?
It was still burning, I think. I'm pretty sure. My brothers and sister would typically let the fire burn itself out before they'd retire to bed. I don't know what time it actually did go out.
And as to yourself, Mr. Ludlow, I take it that you were in some way divided from your family since they lived together here and you kept rooms apart.
That is so, Mr. Holmes, but as I said, the matter's past and done with. We were a small family of coffee farmers at Ola'a, but we sold our land to the new sugar company there, and so were able to retire here to Volcano Village with enough to keep us. There was, I cannot deny the fact, there was bad feeling between my brothers and me about the division of money. Even my sister stood against me for a time. But as we'd spent more and more time together over the past month or two, we'd reconciled. I was a welcome guest at supper and at cards. All had been forgiven, and we were once again the best of friends.
Very well. That will be all for the present. Watson and I shall return to the Volcano house, for I am sure that there is nothing likely to come to our notice here at this time. I will turn things over in my mind, and if I come to any conclusions, I will certainly contact you, Mr. Ludlow and Mrs. Mabby. Oh, and of course, Mr. Kamaka. Until then, I wish you good morning. I'm afraid, Watson, that I shall have to resume a terrible habit of mine.
Oh, surely not the cocaine?
No, tobacco.
Oh.
It's no use, Watson. I have sat here all day and I cannot make head nor tail of it.
No light shines in the darkness?
Nothing but the glow from this great fiery volcanic crater on whose rim our little hotel is perched. But on the tragic incident at hand, I see nothing but darkness.
Well, it does sometimes take you more than a few hours and several pipefuls of tobacco to analyze a problem.
Ah, yes, but I usually have more information to work with than I have here.
Well, just as a mountain will eventually peep out from behind a cloud, so too may some insight arise from the dark and show itself. Will you share with me what you know so far?
If you insist. First, we must carefully consider our position. We must get a firm grasp on what we do know so that when new material arises, we may fit it into its places. Now, I take it that neither of us is willing to admit diabolical intrusion into the affairs of men. Lucifer, Mephistopheles, Old Nick.
Certainly not. This is the 19th century.
Very good. Then we rule the devil entirely out of our minds.
Well, does that include the something, what is that here? Kahuna Ana, the priest who prays men to death? Surely not suggesting.
No, I remain skeptical of that as well. If someone will produce such a man, and if he will demonstrate his skill in my presence, I will reconsider. But until that time, I rule out death by prayer, just as I ruled out death by deviltry. Agreed?
Yes.
All right. Now, as I have often said, when you rule out the impossible, no matter what is left, however improbable, must be the truth. And what have we here? But three persons who are grievously struck by some human agency. Whether a conscious or an unconscious agency, we do not know, but a human agency nonetheless.
I agree. This is the work of some person, not something from beyond the grave.
Very good. Now that is firm ground. Now, what time did this tragic incident occur?
Well, assuming his narrative to be true, sometime after Mortimer Ludlow left that night.
That is a very important point, Watson. In fact, I take it that it happened very soon after he left the room, almost immediately.
How do you figure it?
The cards still lay upon the table, and though it was approaching their usual hour for retiring at night, they had not changed their positions. No, they had not even pushed their chairs back from the table. I repeat, the terrible incident occurred immediately after Mortimer Ludlow left the room, and not later than 11 o'clock that night.
That seems to be so, Holmes.
My next step was to check the movements of Mortimer Ludlow.
To see if he doubled back and perpetrated this horror.
Yes, but he did not double back. He walked away swiftly in the direction of the hotel.
How could you possibly be certain of that?
You know my methods, Watson. What did I do in my examination?
Well, you went around and...
Out in the garden.
Oh.
That clumsy little bit with the watering can.
Oh, yes. By spilling a little water, you were able to obtain a clear impress of his footprints.
Yes. The garden is a dark loam, and the paths are sandy. When they got wet, the footprints showed up admirably. I had already taken notice of the shoes that Mortimer Ludlow was wearing the night before when he left the hotel, and I was therefore able to follow his tracks and distinguish them from among those that were made today, and I was therefore able to determine that he did indeed walk directly from the house to the hotel.
Well, if, as you say, Mortimer Ludlow had left the scene, then some other person was responsible. Someone perhaps from inside the house. Perhaps the cook poisoned them.
That is a logical possibility, Watson. She could have put poison in the food. But notice how uneven and irregular was the effect. Deadly to the sister, but affecting the brothers only in their minds. I was therefore able to rule out any thought that she perpetrated this crime by putting poison in the food, and hence I conclude that Mrs. Porter is completely blameless.
All right, well, what about the thing?
The person.
Who crept up to the window from outside the room. Could not he...
Or she.
Yes. Could not he or she, in some manner as yet unknown, have produced this horrible effect? How do you account for that incident?
No, I am not able to account for that. And that is the sticking point. Anyone who wished to alarm the family inside the house would have to put their face right up against the glass. There is a flower bed and some vegetable rows planted beneath the window, and I was not able to make out any footprints there, nor any smudge on the glass as would have been left by pressing a face against it.
Well, perhaps they stood close to the window without touching it.
I think not. It was very dark last night. There was only the slimmest crescent moon. To be illuminated by the lamp inside the house, one would have to put his face right up against the window. The lamp was not directly opposite the window, it was on the mantelpiece. Moreover, we know the window was closed because Mrs. Porter opened it in the morning.
Then how could an outsider have left such a terrible impression on the company inside?
How indeed! Moreover, we have heard no possible motive for inflicting such a strange and elaborate horror upon the family.
May I make a suggestion? In the meantime, put the case aside for a while until some new data presents themselves. Your attention to young Mortimer Ludlow's footprints reminded me of the footprints in volcanic ash that were mentioned last night. Perhaps if we were to go there and take a walk and see them ourselves, it might clear your head a bit. I think we both would feel a lot better.
Mr. Holmes! Mr. Holmes, I got as far as the ship on my way to Borneo when the terrible news reached me. Well, I hurried back to see if I could help with the inquiry. Well, Mr. Kambaka is utterly at a loss, but I thought perhaps your wider experience might be able to shed some light on them.
You would delay your research to come back up to the volcano?
Well, yeah. As on my many sojourns here, I've come to know this family of the Ludlows rather well. In actual fact, on my American mother's side, we could almost call them cousins. So their terrible fate has naturally been an awful shock to me.
Did you lose your boat?
Well, I'll get to next.
Dear me, this is friendship indeed.
I tell you, they were relations.
Oh, quite so, quite so. Cousins on your mother's side. Was your baggage aboard ship?
Now, everything except what I carried down on horseback last night, my tent and my personal belongings.
I see. But this incident could not yet have made its way into the Hilo papers.
No, I got a telegram.
Might I ask from whom?
You're very inquisitive.
It is my business.
I don't mind telling you, it was Mrs. Mabby's telegram that recalled me.
I see. Thank you. In answer to your first question, I have not yet settled my mind on this business, but I have every confidence of reaching a conclusion. To say more would be premature.
Hope you don't mind my asking, but do your suspicions point in any particular direction?
No, I can hardly answer that.
No. When this conversation can serve no more purpose, I'll say goodbye. Good day, sir.
Are you going to follow him?
Yes, Watson, the game is afoot.
Holmes returned that evening with a slow step and a haggard face, which suggested to me that he had made no progress in solving this mystery. Dr. Sterndale had pitched his tent where he had previously camped near the footprints in volcanic ash. Mortimer Ludlow had left the hotel to go live at his family's house. Holmes spent the following day smoking and cogitating at the hotel. The day after that, he took long walks along the crater rim, alone, returning after several hours without remark as to where he had been. He would only hint darkly that all of our evidence had not yet come to hand, but when it did, we would leave our difficulties behind. Little did I think how soon the words of Holmes would be realized, or how strange and sinister would be that new development which opened up an entirely fresh line of investigation. Yes, come in.
Excuse me, Dr. Watson.
Oh, Mrs. Porter, please come in. Are you feeling better now?
No, sir, I'm not. I'm leaving the Ludlow's house today. I'm so frightened I cannot remain there any longer. Is Mr. Holmes available? I need to tell him something.
No, but I expect he will be back shortly. But if you will tell me, I will write it down and convey it to him when he returns.
Thank you. It concerns Master Mortimer. He hasn't slept at all these last 2 nights since...
Has he ever done this before? Gone without sleep for 2 nights?
I don't know. He hasn't lived in the house for a year or so, and I don't know whether he slept well or when he was lodging here at the Volcano house, but These last 2 nights, he stayed up through the night, drinking coffee and walking around in the rooms.
Well, coffee in sufficient quantity will certainly keep a man awake.
Oh, yes, but he also talks. I mean, I hear him talking to himself. And sometimes so loudly it's kept me awake as well. I'm so desperate for sleep that last night when he started talking to himself again, did I say talking?
Yes, you should.
It was loud, more like shouting. I couldn't stand it, Doctor. I got up and packed my bag and went down the road to my daughter's house and slept there last night. I intend to stay there. In fact, I will never return to the Ludlow house, ever.
Talks to himself? Shouts even? That is intriguing. What does he say when he talks?
I don't know. The walls muffle the sound quite a bit, but I believe he's afraid for his life.
Afraid for his life? Indeed.
Much of what he said is a mystery to me. I couldn't hear the words clearly, and even when I did, some of the words, I didn't understand them. One thing he did say loudly and clearly was, Kahuna Ana Ana. Do you know what that is?
Oh, yes.
That's what I'm so afraid of. I'm sure Master Mortimer believes it was a Kahuna Ana Ana that killed his sister and drove his brothers mad, and now his fears become my fear as well. When you live near the volcano, you may sometimes see things or feel things that are uncanny. It happens sometimes, even to people who aren't superstitious. But believe me, Doctor, I don't hold with silly fears. I walk under ladders, I let black cats cross my path, but this was different. Something came into the house that terrible night. It took 3 of the Ludlows, and surely it means to take Master Mortimer now. It's come back for him, whatever it is, and I think it's still in the house. A lingering presence, a ghost from the past maybe, the spirit of a dead kahuna, I don't know. Something dead has returned to the world of the living, to haunt us and to pray for us all, to die in the night in agony and in horror.
Mrs. Porter, do not let yourself get carried away.
Sorry.
Try not to dwell on that.
Of course.
What happened before. I will inform Mr. Holmes of your concerns when he returns, and with his help, all will be answered. I'm sure of it.
Thank you.
Yes. There is one thing, though, perhaps you can tell me.
Of course.
Was Dr. Sterndale close to his cousins?
Cousins?
Yes.
Around here? Who would they be?
Why, the Ludlows on his mother's side. Are they not his relations?
Oh, that's the first I heard of it, and I'd have heard to be sure. He was close in a different way, though. It's because of him that the family was reunited. It was Dr. Sterndale that encouraged the family to take Master Mortimer back.
Well, why had Mortimer kept away? Why was he estranged?
It had to do with his experiments on coffee trees. They never stopped talking about it, not even when Dr. Sterndale came to call. It was that afternoon before that terrible night. Dr. Sterndale rode over to say goodbye on his way down to Hilo to take his ship. I was in the kitchen and I heard him come in.
Leon, how nice to see you. Are you packed for your expedition?
Yes, I am indeed. But one more time before I set sail, I thought I'd come and see you all.
See Brenda, you mean?
Well,
Who else?
Surely not us. Oh, Brenda, your gentleman has come to call.
What's taking you two so long to get married? It's been, 3 years now? You say you come here to talk about botany with Mortimer, but...
We see how you and Brenda give each other the eye. You know, Ellen is right. It is high time you made a real proposal.
I heard that, and I won't let you rush us into marriage. Leon has too much research yet to be done before we can marry. And don't you boys go talking about us outside of this house. I don't want any gossip in town.
yes, you hear that, boys? We're going to keep it to ourselves. Well, the fact is, I can't afford to take a wife. Well, not until I finish my work, anyway. But this trip to Borneo, it'll confirm my findings, and I'll publish when I return. I can't afford to support both Brenda and myself. I need to make a good and happy life for us together.
Why don't you take her with you?
What, do you want to be rid of me?
If you weren't here, we wouldn't have to watch our salty language.
Ha ha ha.
Oh, wouldn't you like to spend a year in the jungle with him? You could swing from the vines and root around in the dirt for grubs.
I would dearly love to spend a year alone in the jungle with you, my dearest Leon. If we were orangutans. But as we are more highly evolved, it would not be proper unless we were married. So I'm perfectly willing to wait for that happy event. You should go to Borneo to complete your work. That way, when you do come back next time, there'll be no other claim on your life but mine.
You hear that, boys? Your sister is a wise, wise woman. We need to keep it in the family, at least until we set a marriage date. Well, by this time next year, I should have, confirmed a teaching position at a decent university with a substantial laboratory
And a substantial salary.
Well, yes, you don't expect Brenda to work, do you? I mean, I certainly don't. No, we need to live on what I can earn.
It's always money, isn't it? Brenda would have had enough, god damn it.
Owen!
Sorry, see what I mean about watching our language?
You know, Owen is right, though. Brenda would have had a substantial dowry if Mortimer hadn't squandered all her savings.
He withdrew all of the money from the family's bank account.
Spent it on developing a worthless strain of coffee trees.
None of which ever yielded more than a cup of beans. Well, I'm just glad he's out of the house now and out of our lives.
Don't shout, he'll hear you.
What?
He's outside working in the garden, and you know perfectly well it wasn't all his fault anyway. We share some of the blame. We all agreed, did we not, that Mortimer should conduct his experiments on those coffee trees. We all wanted him to succeed, and we all thought he could make a higher-yielding coffee variety to sell to the plantations, and we all wanted to get rich from it. So when he needed to treble the size of his greenhouse and invest in a harvesting machine, and he had to borrow against our land to finance those things, we all agreed that he should do so.
Yeah, but that land belonged to all of us, not just to Mortimer.
Yeah, and we did not all agree that his experiments would consume all of our money and all of our credit. And when the bank threatened to foreclose, we had no choice. We had to sell to the damn sugar company for 15 cents on the dollar.
Yes, well, all right, but that was more than a year ago. We still have this house to call our own, and I want us all here together when I get married.
With Mortimer as the flower girl throwing coffee blossoms.
You must try to befriend him again. I've invited him back later this evening for supper
Oh,
and...
that's just dandy.
Well, I think that if we were to play cards together again, like we used to, we may be able to put aside our bad feelings and perhaps regain some sense of fraternity.
You take fraternity, Brenda. We'll take fratricide.
That'll do, boys. Why don't you two... Oh, hello, Mortimer. Finished in the garden already?
Yes, I've left a basket of sweet potatoes in the kitchen with Mrs. Porter.
I'll go help wash and prepare them.
So I need to go get cleaned up at the Volcano house. I'll be back in time for supper.
Why don't you go split more logs for the stove? You can work off some of your excess energy.
Sure thing. Hey, I bet you I can split more in half an hour than you can.
Bet you can't. I'll race you.
Will this be our sweet aloha then, until we meet again?
Until we meet again.
Oh, they were so happy, and now? Now?
Now, Mrs. Porter. Try to look ahead, not back. Go to your daughter's house. Get a good night's rest. If you need some laudanum to help you rest,
No, thank you, Doctor. I'm sure that just getting away from the Ludlow house would be enough to keep me calm. Please, don't tell Master Mortimer that I overheard him crying out in the night.
Of course not, Mrs. Porter. Goodbye, Mrs. Porter.
Thank you, Doctor.
What did Mrs. Porter want?
She is terrified that what happened to the family will strike Mortimer Ludlow next. He hasn't been sleeping and he talks to himself. She hears him through the walls, though I suspect, in fact, that she is eavesdropping.
As housekeepers are wont to do. Does he say anything of value to our investigation?
Well, apparently he repeats the words kahuna ana ana.
Does he?
Yes. From what she has heard, he continues to believe that it was the spirit of some ancient Hawaiian priest who brought this horror on the family, and he has her believing it too. She has fled the house to go live with her daughter.
I see, thank you.
But that's not all.
Oh?
Yes. I know something you don't know.
What, pray?
Oh, come now. Holmes. Surely you can deduce it by the mud on my pants, the dust on my collar, the tear in my gown.
Thank you, Watson. May I have your news, please?
Brenda Ludlow and Dr. Sterndale were betrothed. Not formally engaged, but promised.
Were they now? Well, well. Who else knew?
Well, the Ludlows and Mrs. Porter, they wanted to keep it a secret from the townsfolk.
But it was Mrs. Mabby who sent the telegram that drew Dr. Sterndale back up to the volcano. I infer that she also was privy to this secret. And I believe that for the time being, it would be best if we were to keep this to ourselves.
Yes. Do you think it's possible that Dr. Sterndale killed his intended bride and the brothers went mad from seeing him do it? It's inconceivable.
Is it?
Yeah. I also wonder what happened to Mr. Kamaka. Do you suppose that he resents the intrusion of a consulting detective, or that he believes himself to be on some hopeful line of investigation?
Neither. In fact, it would not surprise me at all if we were to hear from Mr. Kamaka at any moment now.
Mr. Holmes! Dr. Watson, it's Aaron Kamaka. May I have a word with you?
Holmes! How in the devil did you deduce that?
I did not deduce it, Watson. I saw him dismount from his horse as I entered the hotel. Do come in, sir. Thank you very much for coming. Tell us, what have you learned?
Well, the harbor master at the Gila Wharf confirms Dr. Sterndale's account of his movements. He did indeed spend that night aboard his ship, received the telegram early the next morning, and disembarked immediately, allowing the rest of his baggage to go on to Australia while he returned to be here at the investigation.
And what do you make of this?
Well, he's deeply interested.
Deeply interested, yes. Mr. Kamaka, we would like your opinion on a matter which has arisen. Do you agree, as Mr. Ludlow and Mrs. Mabby are saying, that there are otherworldly forces at work here?
Well, I see you've been reading Mortimer Ludlow's book. He's collected many stories and legends about Hawaii in the old days, before the Haole, the foreigners, came here. And you want to know if there may be some truth in it.
Is there?
Well, it's certainly true that there were kahuna, and that such men performed many functions in the old society. They assisted in childbirth. They dispensed medicine. They interpreted oracles, determined the best days for fishing and for planting. Some of them were apparently able to firewalk across lava flows that were still glowing red hot. And yes, it is true that some of them were able to cast spells and prayers that resulted in men going mad and even dying. They did use what you would call magic. They did look into the future. They did heal and they did kill.
Are there such men living today?
Well, it's possible, but unlikely. I'm a thoroughly modern sort of fellow, like His Majesty Kalakaua. I admire the old language, the old music, and the old dances, but I do not blindly accept the old tales. There are, however, many folks in these islands who accept them completely and live accordingly. So I've learned to give their beliefs some credence, or at least not to discount them entirely. If there is a kahuna ana alive, the best answer I can give is that neither I nor the king has heard tell of him.
But could such a man be living around here?
To that I have to say no. The fact is, we Hawaiians do not dwell at the summits of our mountains, and especially not in the Haleopele Kilauea, the house of Pele Kilauea volcano. I myself am here solely to collect the rent owed to His Majesty Kalakaua for the volcano house and some of his other properties. We Hawaiians have come here for short visits only. The more religious among us come here to say prayers, make offerings, perform rituals, but we Hawaiians do not make our home so close to the volcano.
I see. Thank you. I am satisfied to set aside any thought of supernatural intervention. But I cannot help but think that there is some thread in the puzzle of this fabric which we have not yet grasped and which will lead us through the tangle.
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson!
Cheer up, gentlemen. I believe I hear the voice of Mrs. Mabby calling, summoning us to luncheon. Mr. Kamaka, won't you join us? A hearty meal in this brisk atmosphere will do us all some good, huh?
Mr. Holmes! Oh, Mr. Holmes, the gods are rising against humanity! We are stricken with the wrath of Pele!
Is the sleepy old crater erupting at last?
No, nothing so simple as that, Dr. Watson. Oh, Mr. Kamaka, thank heaven you're here too. We're devil-ridden, or some kahuna ana is at work. Whatever it is, it struck again.
What's happened?
Mortimer Ludlow died during the night, and with exactly the same symptoms as his sister. He was frightened to death. I stopped by this morning, not even an hour ago, with some smoked meat from the larder for Mortimer when I saw this. Oh, it was horrible. I felt sick to my stomach. I had to open the window and catch my breath. And then I ran back to the hotel straight away and brought you here.
I'm gonna need some time to examine everything and try to figure out exactly what happened.
How much time do you need? It's obvious, isn't it? Some inhuman forces at work, and we're all in danger from...
Please, Mrs. Mabby, let us have no more talk of inhuman forces. Your assessment, Watson.
Well, I don't know the clinical cause of death, Holmes, but I'm beginning to believe, like his sister, this man has simply died of fright.
This is very confusing.
Let us take first things first. I'd better make arrangements right away for the body. Please excuse me, I will go to the post office and telegraph for the undertaker. And of course I will send a wire to His Majesty Calico informing him of this further tragedy. I should be able to return in about an hour or so. Mr. Holmes, please feel free to do as your conscience dictates in regard to this matter. Ask only that you put me in mind of anything you may discover.
I am glad to say that my investigation has been fruitful. Mrs. Mabby, I cannot stay to wait for Mr. Kamaka, but I would be exceedingly obliged if you would give him my regards and direct his attention to the window and to the lamp on the table. Each is suggestive, and together they are almost conclusive. I shall be happy to talk with him later at the hotel, should he wish to consult me.
Yes, of course.
And now, Watson, I think that you and I can be better employed elsewhere. You will remember, Watson, that there is a single point of resemblance in the various reports which have reached us. This has to do with the atmosphere in the room upon those who first entered it. You will recall that Mrs. Porter, the housekeeper, said that she fainted when she first entered and had to open the windows to let in the fresh air.
That poor woman was frightened, Holmes. It must have terribly upset her to see the family in that condition.
I'm sure it did, Watson, but is that all? Mr. Kamaka, arriving some 10 or 15 minutes later, said that he was also overcome and had to sit down to compose himself.
You're right, I had forgotten it. It's in my notes.
And now let us consider the experience of Mrs. Mabby. She arrived at the house, saw Mortimer dead at the table, and what happened?
Well, she felt dizzy and sick to her stomach.
Exactly. And now let us consider the circumstances. In each case, there is evidence of a sickening atmosphere. And in each case, there is combustion going on in the room. In the first instance, a fire. And in the second, a lamp.
But with the window shut, to a certain extent, the fire would carry the smoke and fumes up the chimney.
That is a good point, Watson. Indeed, Brenda, sitting closest to the fire, was killed, whereas the brothers, at a slightly greater distance, were less affected. Madness being perhaps the first effect of a drug that works by combustion.
But Holmes, there are only 3 such drugs known to science. Tobacco, opium, and hashish, none of which produces all of the symptoms that the Ludlows exhibited.
Exactly. That is why I looked about the room for something else, for the remains of a substance which had been burned. I wish that I had been directed to this line of inquiry in the first place, for I would have examined the residue in the fireplace. By now the housekeeper has swept it clean. But in the second case, the lamp remained on the table. The obvious place to look for evidence of the drug was on the glass chimney of the lamp. And there, sure enough, I perceived a number of flaky ashes and a fringe of brown powder which had not yet been consumed, half of which I took and placed in this paper.
But why take only half, Holmes?
I will not stand in the way of an official inquiry. I have left exactly the same evidence in exactly the same places for Mr. Kamaka. The drug is on the smoke guard if he has the wit to find it. Now, Watson, we will light our own lamp. But we, of course, have taken the precaution of sitting out of doors to avoid the premature decease of 2 deserving members of society. I will sit here, and you will sit there. Unless, of course, like a sensible man, you are determined to have nothing at all to do with the affair.
No, I will see it through.
I thought I knew my Watson. Now, we are both about the same distance from the lamp and sitting face to face, so that either is in a position to bring the experiment to a close should it prove alarming. Is that perfectly clear? All right. Now, we will take our powder, or what remains of it, and we will place it in the lamp. And we will light our powder. Ah, not a bad smell, really.
No, like joss sticks or incense or something.
Now I don't smell
Right, it's more like...
Oh, I can't move I'm in a black cloud.
A blinding, swirling
A
darkness.
chilly horror.
My head is spinning.
A tingling in my spine.
An awful turmoil in my brain.
The cloud grows thicker and darker, more terrible.
I want to scream.
I want to die. Upon my word, Watson! I owe you my thanks as well as an apology. It was an unjustifiable experiment, even on oneself, but doubly so to inflict it upon a friend. I am truly very sorry.
It is my greatest joy and privilege to help you.
Oh, it would be superfluous to drive us mad, Watson. Any candid observer would certainly declare that we were all very mad before we had embarked upon so wild an experiment. must confess, I had no idea the effect would be so sudden and so severe.
Yes, we must give ourselves a little fresh air.
Yes. I take it that you are no longer under any shadow of a doubt as to how these tragedies were produced.
None whatsoever, but the reason is just as obscure as before.
Let us walk along the crater rim and discuss it together.
Hey, Mr. Holmes! Thank you for pointing me to those clues that you found. I don't understand their significance entirely, but I believe you wanted me to understand that some poisonous smoke was introduced into the room by means of the lamp, and that the perpetrator of this poisoning entered the room by the window, where some threads were snagged on a splinter.
Capital! A splendid deduction. You would make a fine detective, sir.
Well, perhaps, but it wouldn't have occurred to me to look at the lamp or the window if you had not left word with Mrs. Mabby to suggest that I do so. What is your conclusion?
Cast your mind back for a moment to the first tragedy. All evidence now points to Mortimer Ludlow as having been the criminal.
But you said he left the house and went back to the hotel.
It's true, he did. But we have only his word for what happened that night. How bitter the family quarrel, how hollow the reconciliation, we cannot tell. Perhaps his siblings were not of such a forgiving nature as he led us to believe.
Then what was moving about outside in the garden?
Nothing! The report of that also we have only from Mortimer Ludlow. And I must admit that in my determination to verify his story, and in my determination that he did indeed swiftly walk away...
I see. He had a motive for misleading us.
Yes, to distract attention from himself as the suspect.
So, that's very correct. He threw this substance into the fire just at the moment that he left the room. For if he didn't do it, who did? Visitors do not normally arrive after 10 o'clock at night. Mrs. Porter was asleep. Had someone knocked at the door, the brothers would have risen from their chairs and greeted them. No, all evidence therefore points to Mortimer Ludlow as having been the culprit.
Then his own death was a suicide.
Of course. A man who had the guilt upon his soul of having brought such a fate upon his family might well be driven by remorse to inflict the same fate on himself.
On the face of it, a reasonable supposition. But there are cogent reasons to argue against it. Fortunately, there is one man in this neighborhood who can tell us exactly what happened. And you can see his pitched tent and his encampment here at footsteps which are petrified in volcanic ash. Would you kindly step this way, Dr. Sterndale?
Hello, gentlemen. What can I do for you?
Tell us what happened last night.
Why? What happened last night?
A mystery, and you must explain it.
Must? I obey no man's summons, Mr. Holmes, not even yours.
You may consider this the summons from His Majesty Kalako.
All right.
I regret holding this little chat in the open air, but Dr. Watson and I have very nearly furnished an additional chapter, what might have proved a final chapter in what the Hilo Tribune is already calling the Volcano Horror. It has rendered our room hardly fit for the reception of so distinguished a person as yourself, so we have come to your campsite. Perhaps since what we have to discuss will affect you in such a personal and intimate fashion, it is best that we discuss it here, where there can be no eavesdropping.
I'm at a loss to know, sir, what it is you wish to speak to me about that concerns me in such an intimate and personal manner.
The death last night of Mortimer Ludlow.
I have lived so long among the savages, I've become something of a law unto myself, Mr. Holmes. You do well to remember that. I have no desire to do you an injury.
No, nor have I desired to do you an injury, Dr. Sterndale. Surely the proof of that is knowing what I know. I have come to see you instead of the police.
But,
I'm not a policeman. You're not under arrest. But on the island of Hawaii, I am the eyes and ears of His Majesty Kalako, and obliged to report whatever I see and hear. It is in your interest to be forthright and answer whatever questions Mr. Holmes puts to you.
yeah, let's have no more beating about the bush. Bluff on your part, Mr. Holmes. You've chosen the wrong man to challenge. What are you doing here?
I will tell you. in hopes that frankness will beget frankness. What my next step depends entirely upon the nature of your defense.
My defense?
Yes, sir.
Upon what charge?
The murder of Mortimer Ludlow.
You are getting on. Tell me, do all his successes depend on such prodigious powers of bluffing?
I would say that the bluff is upon your side, Dr. Sterndale, not upon his.
Shall I tell you some of the facts on which my conclusions are based?
Go ahead.
Of your return from Hilo, first I will say that it informed me that you were one of the factors that had to be taken into consideration when reconstructing this drama because you allowed all of your belongings to sail away without you.
But, I came back to...
I have heard your reasons and I consider them to be inadequate and inconsequential. You came immediately to our room to ask me whom I suspected. When I refused to answer you, you walked to the Ludlow house, where you stood outside for a long time, before you gathered up your belongings to return back here and make camp.
How could you know that?
I followed you.
Well, I saw no one.
And that is what you can expect to see when Holmes follows you.
During the past 2 days you spent in your tent, you evidently formulated such plans as late last night you carried out. Leaving your camp...
You are following me still?
No, I traced your movements through the evidence.
What sort of evidence?
Leaving your camp, you filled your pockets with some of the little red gravel which lies about this place, a sort of volcanic rock, I presume. You walked to the Ludlow house where you passed through the garden so that you could see through the window where Mortimer was seated at the table. You then tossed some of your little red pebbles against the glass to attract him.
Juggle himself! It is not possible that you could know that!
The Ludlow garden is a dark loam. Your little red rocks stood out noticeably. At any rate, he heard you. He opened the window and you passed into the room that way. Some threads from your sleeve snagged on a splinter on the window. There was an interview, a short one, in which you walked up and down the room. You were wearing, I might remark, the same pair of ribbed hiking boots as are now upon your feet. You left sandy tracks on the living room floor. You then went back out by the window, shutting it from the outside, where you stood in the garden, smoking a cigar. A Cuban panatella, by the way.
Oh, how could you possibly know that?
Holmes is an expert on the subject of tobacco ashes. He can identify, how many is it now?
140 forms of ash from cigar, cigarette, and pipe tobaccos.
Yes, it is a subject which is continually coming up in criminal proceedings. If it can be shown that the murder was committed by a man who was smoking a panatella, a Rothschild...
Enough!
No, you must hear him out.
From your viewpoint outside, you watched what happened in the room. And then you dug something out of the garden and it came back to your campsite here. Now, Dr. Sterndale, how can you possibly justify your actions and what could possibly be the motives for your conduct?
This is why I've done it. For her.
Brenda Ludlow.
Brenda Ludlow. She was the reason I came back to the volcano. We met when I came here 3 years ago to do some research in the volcano. Every year I was drawn back more and more to be with her. Well, she introduced me to her brothers, especially Mortimer. It was Mortimer who came to see me the night before I was to depart for Borneo.
We had science in common. Mortimer had experimented in botany and was anxious to talk with someone who understood his research. In the course of our time together, he introduced me to a new subject, which proved so fascinating that I dropped my previous research project and pursued the one to which he had pointed me. So, I was not surprised when he strolled over here to my encampment.
Oh, come to say aloha, have you?
You're really going to publish your findings?
Yes. I'll edit the manuscript on the ship, and then I'll wire the Scientific American when I reach Australia.
I want credit for discovery in the article.
Oh, don't be absurd. Well, you're mentioned, of course, Ludlow. I mean, I've included you in my citations.
Among your citations?
Yeah.
If I hadn't told you my theory about the kahuna ana, you never would have gone looking for the plant. Right now, my name is a joke at the Scientific American magazine, since they had to retract the article that I wrote on how high the yield would be for my coffee trees, those damnable coffee trees.
Oh, lad, let's not go into that now. I mean, we all make mistakes in research, but we move on to other projects.
Don't you see, Sterndale? I must save face. Your recommendation of me as the discoverer will do it.
But you see, you didn't discover the plant or test its effects. I did. Besides, I'm taking it with me to Borneo. I want to see if it's related to any other species that still grow there.
You were taking the plant with you?
Well, it's obviously hard. I mean, it's lived 100 years. I'm sure it'll survive a few weeks on board ship with me, huh?
No, this will not do. I need to write my own article and take full credit for the discovery. You must leave the plant with me.
You must. Must. Are you mad, Ludlow? I'll do no such thing. I'll continue to cultivate it, and even after I publish, I'll still need it to provide samples to other naturalists so they can confirm my findings and do their own experimentation.
I'm perfectly capable of cultivating any plant. Look, Sterndale, I didn't want things to come to this, but you pushed me beyond my limit. If you do not give me the plant so I can take full credit for the discovery, then I shall tell George and Owen and Brenda exactly why it is that you cannot marry her.
Oh, don't be absurd. You know the reasons perfectly well. I've got to finish my work. I have a teaching position to find. Well, I can't begin to afford.
You don't have to wait. You're world-renowned. You lead expeditions for the American Museum of Natural History. You are published in international journals. Any university anywhere in the world would pay you handsomely today to join its faculty.
I will not be contradicted. I will leave me alone.
You have always belittled my ability to do science. But I am a thoroughgoing researcher, Sterndale, perfectly capable of teasing out a great deal of data when I have been motivated. And I have been motivated. You should be proud of me. I developed a hypothesis, I tested it, and confirmed it. My hypothesis...
Now leave me alone. Now listen, by the time I get back next year, you will have outgrown this ridiculous and childish...
I just say, my hypothesis is that you're already married.
Don't be absurd.
You know, it was quite simple to confirm. I didn't even need a laboratory. Merely a telegram which I sent last winter after your departure. It was an inquiry to the American Museum in New York, and after receiving their reply, I sent another wire to the administrative offices of that city along with a small fee. The mails are slow, but in September I finally received what I had requested. A copy of a marriage certificate issued August 22nd, 1881 to Leon Sterndale, PhD, and Rachel Sterndale, née Patterson, who continues to reside in New York at number 18.
Enough!
I've only to publish these findings and let slip what I've found out. You may forget about marrying Brenda at all. You'd certainly incur the wrath of George and Owen. They'd chop you up like firewood. They're such clods anyhow.
Well, you not only threaten me, you slander me too if you say that I'm paying court to Brenda with a view to committing bigamy.
No. On the contrary, you are a very honorable man, doing everything according to law. You see, I also obtained a copy of your petition for divorce. Obviously, you're still waiting for it to be granted, but in the meantime...
What do you want?
I've told you the choice is yours. If you do not wish me to disclose the fact that you are already married, give me the plant, so I may take full credit for the discovery.
Would be counter to all the rules of scientific inquiry.
Rules? You are citing rules to me. Surely you and I, Sterndale, we are superior men. We make our own rules. You've read the German philosopher Nietzsche, have you not? Well, ordinary men such as my brothers are simpletons who unquestioningly obey every law and convention. But superior men such as you and I, we are Übermenschen, men above the law. We do not have to abide by the rules of society. We make our own rules.
You see, Mr. Holmes, New York is one of those American states where it is exceptionally difficult to obtain a divorce without the consent of both parties, and so far my wife has refused. She does not truly love me as Brenda did, and as I still will always love Brenda.
See, my wife enjoys the adulation of being married to a famous man, but fame hasn't made me rich. Well, she said she would divorce me, but only in exchange for a large sum of money, and so I was hoping to parlay the discovery of this extraordinary plant into a lucrative teaching position, and then to make more money by selling the plant on to other naturalists. That way, you see, I could have bought my wife off, been free to marry Brenda.
The plant of which you speak must be the one that produces the effect of madness.
And causes what superstitious persons to interpret as death by prayer.
What those in the medical profession might diagnose as death by fright.
If I hadn't but known.
Oh, I'm sorry, Doctor. No blame attaches. Well, you couldn't possibly have known about the plant or its effects when you discovered that awful scene at the Ludlow house.
But you did, Dr. Sterndale.
Yes, so did Ludlow.
You already know so much of what happened, Mr. Holmes, that it is clearly in my interest that you should know all.
Here's the plot. I'm very glad that you decided to give it to me. Ah, and in return, here is my copy of your marriage certificate and petition for divorce. Ah, to hold the plant at last. It's thrilling. I feel vindicated already.
Yes, as you can see, it's a member of the solanaceous family. It's the same family as tomatoes, potatoes, and tobacco.
And nightshade.
Well, yes, but it's far more potent than the nightshade. You see, the active ingredient is liberated by burning. It's in the smoke.
In the smoke? Oh, yes, of course, that explains the events of 100 years ago. I can picture the scene now. Before us and behind us, we see only the footprints today, but in 1790, here they come marching up the hill. Phalanx of warriors with clubs and spears in hand, marching to meet their chief Keo'ua in his challenge to Kamehameha. And traveling with them, a powerful kahuna wearing a feather cloak and sacred amulets. His task, once he reached the battlefield, was to pray Kamehameha to death. But only now, Sterndale, we understand how he would have done it. He'd have made a fire and tossed in the plant upwind of Kamehameha's position, so that the smoke would engulf him and kill him.
Yeah, the death wasn't immediate. It was the end result. You know, the pigs that I trapped and I experimented on, well, they shivered wildly at first. They're banging into the sides of their pens and making the most frightful noise. But then they stood stock still, as if frozen, and simply fell over dead. If you choose to repeat my experiment, Ludlow, I suggest you do not do so indoors. Even out in the woods, a breeze could come up, you'd catch a whiff and succumb to its effects.
But what does it smell like?
It smells fragrant at first, but it quickly becomes nauseating. Now, after allowing for the dosage, the pigs that breathed a little of it, well, they exhibited mad, eccentric behavior. It was breathing too much, is what killed them.
You don't say.
The active principle is an alkaloid. It's related to the nightshades. It produces disorientation, and if not fatal, a total disruption of normal faculties.
So even if it did not kill Kamehameha, it might have rendered him mentally unfit for leadership or kingship.
Yes, but of course that didn't happen because of the freakish eruption of the volcano.
Oh, yes. What a sight must have been, Sterndale. The men all try to flee, but are quickly overcome by smoke and ash. And this kahuna Ana himself. He's trapped and stricken along with the phalanx. By the time reinforcements arrived, the heat of the fiery ash had set fire to the plant, and the fumes overcame them, driving them mad. But some unburned part of the plant evidently took hold. Where?
Over there. A tiny knoll. It was under a koa tree. That's where I found it. Somehow it lived.
Are there seeds?
Yes, there are. I'm not sure if it propagates from seeds. You see, that's why I need to carry on experimenting to find out if
that is why I have to do it. Have you already determined how many leaves the kahuna would have had to burn to achieve the desired effect?
None. No, the active ingredient it's in the root.
Really?
Yeah, it's an unusual shape. Well, you'll see it when you replant it on the knoll, which I suggest you do before the day is through.
What sort of shape is the root?
It's shaped like a man's foot and a cloven hoof. Well, that's why I've given it the Latin name, Radix pedis diaboli, root with a devil's foot. Not so much for its appearance, but because of its diabolical effect.
You do have a gift for Latin names, Sterndale. But I will, I think, give it my own name. Something equally descriptive but ending in Ludlowensis, in my own honor. How much of the root is required for the full effect?
Well, not much. I managed to dispatch a fully grown full-grown 200-pound pig was a gram, which I scraped from the thickest part of the root. Less, half a gram if it's dried first and pulverized.
Do you realize? Most of those ancient Hawaiian warriors, why Kamehameha himself, he must have weighed over 200 pounds. And yet, they could have been killed by a bit of root smaller than my little finger.
He took the plant, Mr. Holmes, and I burned the certificate of marriage and the petition for divorce. I resolved that I would take the very next teaching position that might be offered to me, so that I could finally divorce my wife and be free to marry Brenda.
So you see, Mr. Holmes, I was almost grateful to give over the plant and its discovery to Ludlows. When I went to see the Ludlows that evening, it was not to bid them, and especially her, farewell, but a fond aloha. And I didn't think any more of the plant until Mrs. Mabby's telegram reached me in Hilo, and I hurried back, and I realized right away that the kahuna's poison had been used. But remember, I came to see you, to see if you could shed any light on it, but I knew there was no other explanation.
He must have thrown the root shavings into the fireplace before he left the house that night.
And as to his motive, surely it was simple greed. If his siblings were all dead or insane, he'd inherit whatever money and property the family had left.
Yes, he expected you would be in Australia or Borneo before the news ever reached you.
Well, no one could have known how the crime was committed, or even that it was a crime.
A crime that you decided must be punished.
Yeah.
Why did you not complain to the sheriff or bring the matter to my attention?
Because Mortimer Ludlow had to suffer the same fate that he had inflicted upon his brothers and on my beloved Brenda. Mr. Holmes, I have lived most of my life away from civilization and beyond the law. And, well, I've come to believe what Mortimer said, that men, superior men, such as I, are not bound by society's conventions. That you yourself are among those whom the philosopher Nietzsche called Übermensch. Men who are above the law, men who are free to think and do as they choose. So, when I saw Mrs. Porter leave the house, I knew what I had to do. It was all planned. I would be both judge and executioner. I held a revolver to his head, and I forced him to sit before the lamp, and I put the root on his hand, and I kept him covered. I backed off. And I went through the window, and I closed the window behind me, and I tapped on the window with my revolver, and he put the root into the smoke gun. In 5 minutes, he died. My God, how he died. He didn't say a word. He didn't shriek out, but his face, you know. And my heart was flint. He endured nothing that my darling Brenda had not suffered before. And then, you're right, I plucked out the plant and I brought it back here. You can do with me as you choose, gentlemen. There's no man alive who fears death less than I.
Do you still have reason to go to Borneo as you had planned?
Right. Yes. Well, yes, I abandoned my research into the Hawaiian poetry to come back to pursue the kahuna's poison. There's so many plants yet to be discovered in Borneo, plants unknown to man that could just be...
Then I suggest you go and find them. For I at least am not prepared to prevent you. In my opinion, the real malefactor, Mortimer Ludlow, has been, to quote Mr. Shakespeare, hoist with his own petard.
As I said, I am not a policeman nor a judge. The final disposition must come from His Majesty Kalakaua. I shall give him all the evidence uncovered by Mr. Holmes. And I will recommend that he allow you to depart the kingdom, never to return. But until that judgment is rendered, whatever it may be, you will remain here.
I'll do whatever the king decides.
We are on the crater's edge of a great fiery volcano. We must not allow this horrible drug to wreak its horror on others. So we cast it into the fire pit and let it be incinerated as it should have been 100 years ago?
Oh, no, Dr. Watson. Certainly this devil's foot must never again be used to take a life, but neither may it be cast into the crater. Kilauea is not an incinerator. It is the home of Pele, and one may not, so to speak, throw a rock through the window of her house. Only certain things offered up with the requisite prayers may be cast in, and this deadly plant, I'm sure, is not an appropriate offering. I will take it into my custody and bring it to His Majesty Kalakala. Perhaps there is some medicinal value that can be extracted in recompense for the horror that it has caused.
An excellent conclusion, Mr. Kamaka, but I will, if you permit me, retain just a small sample to add to my collection on our return to Baker Street.
Yeah. Ha! Thank you, gentlemen. Surely you are all superior men.
As a detective, I am bound to uphold the law. But as a man, I think, and I believe that you will agree, that we can no longer interfere in this case. Our investigation has been independent, and our action shall be likewise. The king shall be informed, and if he reaches the same conclusion that I did, and as Mr. Kamaka did, he will let Dr. Sterndale go on to Borneo. Would you have denounced him to the police?
No. He was horribly wronged by a man who fully deserved to die for his crime. We must leave it to posterity to judge whether he or you or anyone, the king included, is an Übermensch, a man above the law. Dr. Sterndale was not unmoored from civilization's legal statutes. Indeed, he acted in accordance with the oldest of mankind's written laws. An eye for an eye.
Well said, Watson. And now I think we can dismiss the volcano horror from our minds. In my absence, the criminal element in London will have been on the rise, and I must return to face them down. You know, I have never loved. But if I did, and if the woman I loved met such an end, I might very well have acted as Dr. Sterndale did. Who knows?
Yes. Well, let us go back to the hotel and arrange for our departure.
Some fumes, which are not of a poisonous nature, would be welcome now, eh, Watson?
Yes. Let us refresh ourselves with some tobacco.